morning and welcome back. This is World Talks coming to you live from Warsaw. I'm Saria Stremska, and as promised, we're going to discuss Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy maintains his troops are still fighting in Russia's Kursk region, adding that Moscow is spreading falsehoods and doing everything to prevent a ceasefire. To discuss the latest developments in Ukraine and on the topic of Ukraine, I have Vitalii Rishko, Ukraine Program Coordinator, Global Governance Institute, joining me right now. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us. Delighted to have you with us.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation.
So let's start with this recent phone call between Lavrov and Rubio. Well, apparently, this is what the statement said following the phone call, they agreed to continue working towards restoring communication between the US and Russia. Well, that is pretty enigmatic. What does it mean?
Well, to me, it sounds like we are coming back to the great power politics, although it was never gone. So especially now that we see those statements from the US that we sometimes can't even distinguish from the Russian statements, which basically is about great powers dictating the state of world affairs, about reordering of international order, and actually like great powers deciding for other mid and smaller powers so that those don't have their say in international affairs, and that the strength is coming actually back, the power is coming back, the use of power is being normalized.
Right. So, 2 days prior to that statement on March 14th, Trump said that he has some pretty good news regarding this 30-day ceasefire deal. However, of course, he did not give any details. So where do we stand right now?
Well, I've been repeating this already for, 2 or 3 months, that to me, this whole negotiating process that has started is a big bluff, because there is simply no necessary prerequisites for effective negotiations and diplomacy, simply because Russia does not willing to negotiate. There is no evidence of Russia willing to negotiate. If you see recent news from Ukraine, basically every night you see 100 Shaheds flying over Kyiv and bombing civilian areas, targeting civilians, causing war crimes. That does not signal a willingness to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is quite unsettling indeed. What about the coalition of the willing? Because Europe seems to be stepping up its efforts. If Friedrich Merz takes over as Germany's next chancellor, perhaps he will send the Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Do you think that Europe will be able to step in and support Ukraine enough for Ukraine to continue fighting?
Well, for Europe, it is exactly a moment of now or never. Either it will ramp up its support to Ukraine and do more in terms of European defense and invest more into its own armed forces, or it will just be suffering in this triangle of US, Russia, and China doing whatever they want. But indeed, it is possible. It is possible. But the biggest issue here is that Europe is always thinking about itself. It perceives itself to be smaller. It doesn't behave like a great power. That's what's required from the EU. But in order to do that, there are so many other issues that it has to deal with. And in the first place, I think it would be the common foreign and security policy. So there is this big issue of having all the foreign policy related initiatives being voted unanimously. So somehow the EU has to figure out how to get rid of that rule, which is not an easy process, because you would have to probably change the funding treaties. And basically, because if you have some new initiatives aimed at boosting Europe's security and defense, you'll probably have some states who won't be willing to do that. You'll have Hungary, you'll have probably Slovakia, and maybe some others.
Right. I mean, there's another meeting on Thursday of this coming week, so perhaps we'll have more details as to what could happen and some operational decisions, as Keir Starmer hinted at this. Now, let's take a look at what is happening on the front lines. I wanted to discuss the Kursk situation because we have varying narratives, right? I mean, the Russian one and the Ukrainian one. And of course, we don't really know what's going on the ground.
Well, basically, from what I see, is there is certain retreatment happening from the Kursk region on Ukraine's side. The operation itself was designed to distract Russian forces in the east and south, so partially it did have some success, and we don't know for sure whether there is really a necessity for them to be there. Maybe they are needed on the other fronts, particularly in the east. But from what is not understandable to me is whether Ukraine is still willing to use the Kursk card, as Trump says, as leverage over negotiations, if such negotiations take place. Will it be able to trade over some territories? I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think Russia would go for it.
I think that option is gone with them sort of taking some losses there. However, we can also talk about other front lines. There's pressure in Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, and Kupiansk. So how is Ukraine faring there?
So for Ukraine, it is indeed very difficult to maintain the current front line, although it is still doing that. For that, we need a constant and permanent, let's say, military support, because there have been a lot of delays. If you remember, in 2024, there was like a 6 months delay of the US weapons, so no ammunition, especially the most significant one for HIMARS that is helping to withstand the pressure of Russian troops. That is what we need right now. And if it will stop, of course, Russia will be succeeding in grabbing more and more land.
Right. Okay. So let's think a little bit. What are some of the next steps? What could happen next on the Ukraine front in terms of discussions, decisions? What decisions are we waiting for? Are we waiting for the Russian side? How do you imagine this process?
Well, absolutely, the ball is on the Russia side. If it truly wants to end this war, then it will have to make some sort of concessions. Right now, we don't see any concession from their side. More demands are coming. So let's say they are saying that they don't want even to see the shipments of Western military aid to Ukraine because they see it as their problem. So even if a ceasefire takes place, they would not go for it unless the military aid stops completely. Obviously, Ukraine won't go for it. Then they want the recognition of Russia's occupied territory of Ukraine to be considered as Russian. Obviously, Ukraine won't go for it. Then there are some other demands where they want to limit Ukraine's size of the military. Well, that is not possible, I guess, because when you are fighting a full-scale war for 3 years and you don't know what happens next, you don't have any security guarantees, how can you go for it?
Right.
So it is really complicated. It is really complicated. And unless Russia does some concessions, I don't think there will be any success. And for that, to ensure this potential success, there has to be a more proactive approach on the US part. They do have to pressure more on Russia.
Well, and I mean, Marco Rubio actually said that a certain foreign minister from a European country told him that the war should continue to further deplete Russia, that it actually would be more beneficial, right, for Russia if the war ended right now, and that the war should continue. Do you agree with that statement?
No, not really. From what I saw recently on what foreign analysts are saying, it's quite interesting. So one of them mentioned that probably Russia does not want to negotiate because it is actually scared because of some potential protest against the regime. because it didn't reach any of its goals of initial goals of actually subjugating Ukraine.
All right. So, because I mean, the argument, I guess, was pertaining to the economy and the sanctions, right, that are still in place. But perhaps that is not the case. Now, another statement that I came across was that without Western help, and it has been implied that it meant U.S. help, Ukraine has a year at most. It will be able to fight for a year at most. Do you think this is valid?
That could be valid for Ukraine. There is no other choice, and most likely European states will continue their support, and they'll be most likely ramping up their own defense investments, defense strategies, military spending, and ammunition production. So I think it is possible. And I guess also in a year or so, there will be another election to the US Congress, which also makes it possible that the US foreign policy after those elections will probably shift again, because we don't know for sure who will be controlling the Senate and other bodies.
Lots of things still up in the air. Let's hope that they will get clarified and, of course, in Ukraine's favor. Vitalii Rishko, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.